reactions to pharmaceutical medications each year. Now, what is so alarming about this statistic, George, is that these 106,000 people per year are on medications that are properly prescribed with a normally expected side effects, and they're used as prescribed, does not include overdose. So this is people taking the right drug in the right dose, and yet you still have 106,000 people dying in America each year. In the United Kingdom and Australia, we have very similar statistics. But what's so fascinating about this, George, is that we have so many people dying from adverse reactions to pharmaceutical medications, and yet nobody hears about it. And this is what you're so driven to use the food matters and the help get this message to more people, because it needs to be heard. In the United Kingdom, we've got 10,000 people a year dying from adverse reactions to drugs. And at the same time, only 3,500 people dying from car accidents and 9,000 people dying from prostate cancer. And the amount of publicity in the United Kingdom around making the road safer, car incidents, and death tolls, and prostate cancer, and yet nobody hears the fact that 10,000 people are dying each year in the United Kingdom. So we have similar scenarios in the United Kingdom and America, and it's absolutely shocking, and it's not awful, it's not necessary.
What is shocking is the point that you guys over the film, and that is the comparison of pharmaceutical solutions, and I use that in quotation marks, to vitamins. Because as we've learned about this program tonight, after this article recently, there is very demonstrable dangers of taking pharmaceutical drugs.
This is a very serious situation. The regulatory industry that protects these bodies, they protect the agrochemical industry, they protect the agricultural industry, they protect the pharmaceutical industry. These regulatory bodies are very heavily controlled by industries themselves, and I'm sure many of them are very aware. What we have new level of control in the health and nutrition field, if we have this control new code, this code of parliamentaries, which is a control over how the supplement industry is regulated. And the more control that the regulatory industries can have over the supplement industry by limiting the supply, reducing available doses to people, it is basically going to play into the hands of the pharmaceutical industry. So, we're seeing the regulations tighten up, and we as consumers need to take control and take control over our health, over our purchasing with supplements we can consume.
Back to discussing the medical industry. You already mentioned that very few doctors get any kind of nutritional training in medical school at all. It gets worse because there are those medical professionals who are interested in nutrition, the benefits of nutrients and vitamins. They've written scientific papers, peer-reviewed papers that have been published in professional journals. Those journals just basically get tucked into a drawer and ignored, which is I was amazed to learn in your film.
Well, we have this situation where the drug companies are in such a position of power, and it's really a regulatory problem that we're talking about here, George, because the way that the pharmaceutical industry is regulated, that is the problem. We have the bodies that are required to license and regulate drugs, and also the bodies that are around to educate the doctor industry are controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. So, for instance, a doctor in his practice, and this is where I sympathize with many of the doctors out there who are trying to do their best, but their only source of information that is available to them, generally speaking, is coming from the pharmaceutical industry. So the pharmaceutical industry controls the medical journals because they are the primary source of funding for the medical journals. They advertise in these journals and hence have created an element of control over these journals. And so any studies that they publish about their medications that are favourable for the medication, they get published in the medical journal, and they also buy back copies off the journal producers and advertise in the journal. So the information being fed to doctors is coming from medical journals, which are funded by the drug industry. It's coming from drug reps, which are paid representatives from the drug industry, and it's coming from postgraduate training. And all doctors have to undergo a certain amount of training each year to keep their license. And 65% of postgraduate training is funded by the drug companies through conferences as well. So we have a situation where a doctor might be so busy that they have very little time to see as many patients in a day as possible, that any source of information that they're being given is from the pharmaceutical company in most instances, and that's where we have a situation where there's so many prescriptions being out and so many people consuming this drug.
Well, I think it's probably worse than that. And many physicians are on the payroll, that they accept stipends, regular payments from drug companies in order to agree to dispense only those drugs.
And the more that they dispense, and if they're the best dispensing doctor in their area, they're invited to conferences and in international golf trips and holidays. And it really is an economic issue. And if you discover that Jerome Byrne from Food Matters, the documentary, one of the interviewees, he's a medical journalist from the United Kingdom, he said that if you discover that the regulatory body for restaurants, for example, the regulatory body for restaurants that was required to regulate if they were clean, had clean toilets, provided clean food, if that regulatory body was paid for by the restaurants themselves, you'd have a serious problem because there's a conflict of interest. And this is exactly the conflict of interest we have in the pharmaceutical industry. The bodies that are required to license and regulate the drugs are paid for by the industry. The drug industry is paying the regulators, they're paying the academics that are researching the drugs, they're paying for the trials that are submitted to the regulatory bodies, and they have to provide at least two clinical trials of their drug being proven effective over a placebo. And that does not mean they can do 100 trials, have 98 of those trials fail. But as long as 2 trials prove effective, they can take those trials to the regulatory body and get regulatory approval for that medication. And this is a very dangerous situation. We need to remove the divide between the regulatory industry and the pharmaceutical industry so that we can tie it up here. And until that happens, we don't have an industry that is controlled by lies and deceit.
Well, lies and deceit arise in another way. It's not only to the benefit of the drug industry when they want to seek approval for some new patented contraption that they've got to put out. It also has been used to pummel vitamins and nutrients, that they will have these studies that, as your film points out,
medications. And in the late 90s there was around St. and this is a natural herb that can be used to alleviate symptoms of depression and elevate mood. And when research papers were coming out with the importance of St. John's wort and how it's amazing for depression symptoms, and when it's used in conjunction with it, a quick it can be a lot more effective than taking medications, the pharmaceutical industry swung into action and developed a campaign to squash any of this information. They put leading doctors on their payroll onto all the major TV networks saying that the hope that St. John's wort is not effective and that these medications are much more effective. And then they also use scare tactics of, if you use this herb in conjunction with a medication, then it's going to be dangerous. So again, they're playing on these scare tactics. It can really, the primary benefit to the pharmaceutical company is adding value to shareholders. And this is where we have a severe problem in the regulatory and advertising side of things.
I remember in the film that the point is made a couple of times when you look at the dangers of pharmaceuticals, which are vast, compared to the dangers